Good morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Just your quick reaction to the BMW plant at Oxford building the next generation electric Mini.
Well, I think you said, quite a lot of what there is to say about it, which is the Doomsters were wrong. And the United Kingdom is a powerhouse of an economy. And to the extent that we're held back by anything, it's not our leaving the EU, it's our inability really thus far to have really maximised the benefits of it. We wanted to get rid of those 4,800 EU regulations that are on our statute book. We wanted to deregulate generally. We wanted to cut taxes. These are all things that were possible as a result of Brexit. And actually, we could be a much more powerful economy. But notwithstanding our government's inability to really deliver an agenda for growth, the UK still keeps powering on.
Yeah.
I think the other interesting point to make is that Germany has been lobbying, and I think has now successfully done so, for the EU not to levy charges on British electric components for electric cars going to Europe, because they fear the impact China's going to have if British products are prohibited from going into Europe. And I know you were talking to Ian Duncan-Smith about China, and the dynamic there, I think, is particularly interesting.
Yeah, and again, we see an awful lot of issues going on with the German economy. Goodness me, they're in a lot of trouble there. But let's talk about that whole sort of Brexit. Britain was all about global Britain, wasn't it? It was all about turning our attention to the growing economies, particularly in Asia and Southeast Asia, India particularly, now the world's most populous country, overtaking China extraordinarily this year. There's been a lot of talk about a free trade deal with India. We had the Prime Minister meeting with Narendra Modi at the G20 summit over the weekend, and Prime Minister talking about being optimistic that a free trade deal with India is in sight. A lot of concern, though, back here, a lot of backbenchers and indeed a lot of other us ordinary voters concerned about what we'd have to give in return for a free trade deal in India, because we know one of the things that they're looking for is a huge number. I mean, hundreds of thousands of more visas than they're already getting for people to come and live and work here in the UK, when we are seeing such an explosion in net migration in this country. Is that a deal that's worth doing?
Well, I'm surprised that immigration is on the table as part of the deal, because it seems to me India's got its way already with immigration. We've had 1.2 million new migrants come into the UK for the year to 30th June 2023, 600,000 net, but 1.2 million gross, a large proportion of which are from India. And indeed, if you look at some of the crossings of the Channel, increasingly they're coming from India and Pakistan. So, they've kind of won that point already. If you listen to what the Indians are saying, and if you believe what they're saying, what they're lobbying for is easier visa rights for workers to come and work in manufacturing facilities in the UK, which would be part of this free trade deal, which would be swept up in it. But, we'll just see where those chips lie. What we do know, and another thing that we failed to take advantage of with Brexit, what we do know is that our government sees fixing our labour market problems and the generation of GDP growth much more easily delivered through unbridled migration.
Yeah. But again, we're in Blairite territory, aren't we? It's GDP. GDP is going to go up because we've got loads of extra people. And even if it goes up per capita, so per person, it's going up. Well, even if it does do that, it's a question of how that's being shared out, because as we see, and every study has shown since, and we've seen this when we did see sort of an exodus of people from Europe, nothing to do with Brexit. Actually, it was entirely to do with lockdown. People, as lots of Brits did, went home to their families during lockdowns. Is that funnily enough, wages had to go up to get, to get what otherwise would have been regarded low-skilled work, a decent pay rate. I mean, we've seen it. We've seen everything that people like you and I were arguing has been borne out on this. Let's talk about also, that's legal migration, something which the government appears to be totally unwilling to control, even though they are able to control it and have always been able to control migration from outside the EU. But illegal migration, they certainly don't seem to have a grip on. Rishi Sunak had what was called the Spritz Summit, because with Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, because she had an Aperol Spritz while she was sitting with him drinking his mineral water at the summit, to talk about basically, look, let's join forces, let's persuade the other EU leaders to back the government's Rwanda plan. Like, look, illegal migrants being sent sent elsewhere, not staying in Europe, basically getting rid of that incentive to try and make it to Europe. Do you think he's going to have any luck there?
Well, Meloni has been a bit of a damp squib, actually. She was elected on a promise to turn the boats back, as well as quite a firmly Eurosceptic ticket. And she's become more and more compliant, which often happens once people get elected. But the only solution, as I think I've mentioned to you before, Julia, in my opinion, the only solution in stopping the boats is turning them back. And Georgia Meloni, Western Balkans, and the Greece, which are the three entry points for migrants coming from North Africa and the Middle East into Europe. Those countries have to get a grip of the boats seeking illegally to enter their territorial waters. And as I've also said repeatedly, and I won't tire of saying it, we have all international law on our sides as independent sovereign nations to protect our territorial waters. Under Article 33 of the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, we have the right to take preventative action and turn boats back. Australia did it in 2013 with their Operation Sovereign Borders, and we need to develop the political courage and determination to actually control our borders and enforce what is a fundamental requirement if we're to be a sovereign state.
Indeed. Perna Habib, always good to talk to you, former MEP, member of the Reform UK Party. Thank you for that. Let's bring in James Heal on this. I mean, it is just, I mean, it's one of the biggest growing issues in Europe, in European politics across the board. And I know there are moaners who get very upset at people wanting to, to have left the EU under the illusion that we can't govern our own business. They're seeing again and again parties on the right, not anti-immigrant, anti-mass uncontrolled illegal and legal migration parties, i.e. representing the general public's view, are on the rise in Europe because people have had enough.
Yes, and I do think that people in Britain should emphasise the European nature of this problem. Often we talk about the UK facing an unprecedented challenge. That's true, but it's often significantly worse, particularly on Italy's southern border as well. Yeah. And I'm not surprised to seeing the UK and Rishi Sunak working with Meloni on this issue. And just last week, Austria also criticised the ECHR system. So I think that really this is much more about trying to find ways of dealing with a 1940s, 1950s style legal framework on this, rather than anyone trying to make it a sort of Tory issue or party political issue. It's a huge systemic issue due to unprecedented legal migration.
Yeah.